I'm KamalaDevi, and today I'm here with Sara Mednick. I want to tell you a little bit about a very dear friend and co-creator, author who's recently published The Power of the Downstate. So we're here today to talk. I want to kind of pick your brain specifically about, in your new book, this juicy topic of what's the downstate have to do with sex. So I want to give you a little introduction, but it's really good to see you.
Yeah, it's so good to see you. Come on, KD.
Yeah, we've been working together for a long time. We've known each other for a
long time.
So it's been fun, actually, through multiple books, because when we were first working together, we were with Take a Nap, your first book. So I want to say
we started talking.
Yeah,
then, but that was when we started working together.
Yeah, and I think it was The Artist Way originally that brought us into connection.
Well, so. Jess and Bill too.
Yeah, good community friends.
Mm-hmm.
So Sarah's a professor of psychology at the University of California, Irvine, where she directs the sleep and cognition lab. So she's like the head of this big, crazy sleep lab. And I say crazy because you're like literally looking inside of biorhythms and constantly like high levels, really tracking people with technology. And so as a world-renowned scientist, Sara Mednick investigates mind-body mechanisms that support performance and improvement. And she's been interviewed by the New York Times, Washington Post, BBC, and more. And now, here we are, we get to pick your brain. So I'm super touched that you're willing to talk as a scientist about sex, because it's kind of like lifting up the hood and saying like, ooh, what is this mystical, magical process of sex and intimacy, and what does a scientist have to say about that state, those altered states that we go into? So I thought maybe we could start there.
Yeah. So, I mean, the book in general is all about rhythms. It's all about that we have, every biological system follows a rhythm. And what the rhythm gives us is what I call the upstate, which is this period where we have this burst of energy and we have all the resources we need to go take on challenges. And right after the upstate is a downstate, right? And it goes upstate, downstate, upstate, downstate. And what happens in the downstate is that you replenish the resources that you used in the upstate and get yourself ready for the next upstate. So part of what the book is about is trying to understand how are, all of our different systems in our brain and in our body, our cardiovascular system, respiration, metabolism, sleep, circadian rhythm, autonomic nervous system, how all these systems have these rhythms of upstates and downstates, and how tuning into those rhythms actually makes you really powerful, because you're then active in your active state and you're replenishing in your downstate, and then it makes you ready for the next upstate.
It's really beautiful to know that you're interested in, as a scientist, you're looking at all these different systems. It's more comprehensive than, Take a Nap was really more about your specialty in sleep, but this is looking at circadian rhythms and like, even if I understand, even the life cycle, like the whole rhythm of as we age and
yeah, you can look at it of like, fall, winter, spring, summer. You can look at it, the life cycle. I look at the women's life cycle with the hormone cycle, and then the life cycle of reproductive age to menstrual cycle to old age, right? And even, the day, right? You have the day where you have this active cycle, and then you have this downstate of the night. And then within the day, there's lots of mini cycles as well. Yeah, and I guess one of the...
And in the microcosm, I have a fun, like my bookmarker in your book is actually pointing out like the downstate of the neuro. I love this little image where you have the neurons refractory period. So, we all know like after big orgasm, there's the come down and the let down, where you literally feel like you're falling, like, it's like you're falling down through the earth. It's pretty clear that the systems are like letting down.
Yeah. And how important, you know, I mean, evolutionarily, what people think about that, you know, the post-orgasm downstate is like, it just keeps you from spending too much of that seed energy, right? And that's really interesting. But I think it's also, you know, that's the intro to sort of the idea that one of the ways that you can get to the downstate is through having an orgasm, right? And I would say there's many different intimate ways to increase your positive restorative processes, but one of those is kind of like, and it's like, you know, sometimes it's a quickie and sometimes it's a long experience, but it's this rise in activation where you raise up what I call rev, or the sympathetic arousal, and you increase it super intensely. And then right afterwards, because you've been so aroused, you have this automatic shift into the downstate of the autonomic nervous system, which is what in the book I call restore, but in science we call it the parasympathetic system, which is by far the most restorative system that we have.
Yeah, I really appreciate the simplification, because, you know, science, especially as a comprehensivist, it's like it can be so overwhelming to look at all these different systems, and for you to just say there's, you know, there's a revving up state or a restoring state, and to actually make that distinction so accessible. And it's, you know, so I'd love for you to speak a little bit more about that difference, but it's nice that we can all just identify that in ourselves. It's like, oh yeah, there's times when I'm, you know, doing pleasure and it's this kind of wild pleasure. And sometimes it's pleasure because I'm just in the bath and I'm just like super relaxed.
Right, right. Yeah, you know, I mean, having studied the autonomic nervous system for many years now, I just saw how it took me so many years to understand it. And I kept thinking, why is this so complicated, right? And that's when I started writing the book. I thought, I need to make this simpler, because if I just keep using sympathetic, parasympathetic, and the prefrontal cortex and all this stuff, I thought this is just going to not flow. Right. And so I wanted to come up with terms that were really intuitive. And that was where the rev came up, because in the autonomic nervous system, we have two branches, right? One is the sympathetic fight or flight. And that's the one that we're in during most of the upstate during the day, right? We have this really powerful readiness factor where we're ready for whatever's going to come. And we're, you know, we have high cortisol levels and we have high glucose levels, and we're ready to sort of shuttle energy to whatever muscles or brain areas need energy. And that's great, but it also takes a lot of energy, and it uses up the resources when you activate that system. Mm-hmm. And so in order to keep us in a state of, I call it it's homeostasis, but homeostasis I sort of talk down a little bit in terms of the book, because I think that a better way of thinking about the way we are is recovery plus, because we're always kind of learning. We're not just trying to get back to a baseline or a homeostatic state. We're actually growing and learning. So
yeah, so it's not just like, okay, let's get balance. We're revving, we're restoring, and let's find balance. It's more like, hey, let's do an upward spiral where we're actually evolving. You know,
yes, let's learn from whatever scared us. Let's learn from our mistakes, or let's learn from this exciting thing that I realized, oh, I really like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is, and still it requires you to deplete yourself, right? And it still requires this major exertion, with then following it this big replenishing restore. And what happens is when you, so obviously it helps our bodies and our minds to calm ourselves down, because that sympathetic overdrive leads to what's called autonomic imbalance. And for people who have autonomic imbalance, they have high risk for cardiovascular disorders and metabolic syndrome and unhealthy weights, and stress. It's chronic stress where you have this hyper revved up state and you don't have enough of the downstate to make up for all of that chronic levels of stress and chronic levels of upstate.
This is where I just want to say your book is so timely, it's like we're all, culturally, I just feel like everybody's been in such a revved up, intense, like produce space. And then when COVID hit, it's like, like everything put on the brakes. There was lockdown, there's slowing down. And then the biggest thing you hear everyone say is like, oh, I just want to keep living like this. I want to slow things down. I want to, like, it put me in touch with what really matters. And now, as the masks are coming off and the flight restrictions are lifting, you see people just going back to normal. And it's like, how do I, maintain that, that connection with the nourishment of living more in a downstate. And so
I definitely thought of, I know that there's many people who suffered greatly during that period. And it's like, I think that for some people, there was a really big downstate that happened. And I think that's right. And then there's other people who, who never stopped working, who are working as
we're living in panic and living in survival. And
it's like, it was so unequal the way it affected people. But I do think, for some people who were lucky, it was a really big downstate. But then, we're back to some pretty scary stuff right now. I keep talking to people and everyone feels like they're pretty depressed and pretty freaked out and pretty scared. And there's just so many ways in which what seems to be happening in the world is just keeping people in this state. I was just, talking to my postdoc and she started crying on the Zoom because she's just, has that feeling of safety and lack of safety, and how important safety is for being able to have a good downstate.
Yeah. And I want to speak to a lot of, obviously working as sex and relationship coach and mentor, I'm working with people whose relationships are sometimes in breakdown or who are trying to, have, my specialty is like kinky, queer, tantric. They have these alternative lifestyles. And there is a degree of like, within that, we can actually really fracture. And a lot of it is like, hey, we're working, we're growing, we're working on the relationship. But when that's not going well, it's really hard to get that self-love and the nourishment and the, like, how do you come back to your center despite what's going on in the relationship? And so I'm a huge advocate of like down regulation and coming from your core. Because if you're always like trying to skydive on every date or trying to make the relationship so, this tantric extraordinary experience, it's like not, it can be really out of balance if you're seeking and trying that. It's like, well, what's it mean to come down and come into center?
Yeah. And what are you avoiding? There's so much. Sorry, I'm just going to close the door because my son's upstairs. I think that there's a lot to be talked about in terms of the addiction to the upstate, and how hard it is. I mean, it's, I'm one of a million books that has said we need to rest, right? And there's been, balance between activity and repose is a Sufi thought, right? It's like, these are ancient ideas. And it's, for some reason, really hard for us to appreciate how it is the other half of the equation of all of that activity. Mm-hmm. You can't have the sustainable activity and excitement without having that downstate and without having a period where you're just totally tuning down.
So of the millions, books that have written about this, meaning because this is such a popular and historic topic, what do you think makes your message unique? Is it that you're a deep scientist and you can bring us to a current understanding of what's happening under the hood, or what is it, your ability to make it, to simplify these concepts? What would you say, makes this book so special?
I think that the approach that I take is I see us as a whole system. and that the whole system has a general rhythm, and that every subsystem, the brain, the heart, the guts, every subsystem has its own rhythm. And the idea of resonance, right, where when two rhythms share the upstate and downstate, where they get coupled and temporally coupled, that creates this larger, expansive activity, right, where you actually have stronger parasympathetic drive or restorative drive when you get your heart rhythm in line with your breathing rhythm, right, which is heart rate variability, or HRV, or when you get your big boost of restore activity to coincide with your deep sleep in the first part of the night. So that idea of how do you align all these different rhythms such that they can resonate. They're not kind of independent of each other, and that you really are treating yourself as one whole system.
Ooh, so on that note, what would you say is the best time to or how do we get our sexual rhythm, our sexual, in best alignment with our sleep cycles and other cycles?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously there's so many different times that sex is great to have, right? So it's not like there's a bad time. But I do have a funny I tried to make the book entertaining because I can't stand reading self-help books that are not funny. So part of the thing that I enjoy is trying to find ways in which, it's actually making it fun. And so one of the things I talk about is the Downstate Trifecta, which is how to, if the goal is to get your restorative time aligned with your deep sleep, because that really makes the restorative system resonate. So how can you do that? And I'm a big fan of thinking about your exercise as a really big trigger for the revved up state. And then what follows is the restore state. But you have to be careful about the timing. So with exercise, one of the things is to push all your intensive aerobic exercise to the morning, because that really jacks up the rev system, and it takes a long time for it to calm down. If you give it enough time to come down, then you have this complementary rise and restore that matches the first part of sleep, which is the deep sleep, the slow wave sleep. And that's when you get that boost. So the Downstate Trifecta would be having morning exercise, like morning intensive cardio, and then having a little bit of melatonin. If you like to take melatonin, you can take melatonin, but take it, 2 to 3 hours before your bedtime, but also before your estimated time of orgasm, your ETO.
ETO, estimated time of orgasm. Love
exactly.
it.
So if you kind of know, it's like the estimated time of arrival of the plane. But if you kind of know, I'm going to be kind of probably peaking around like 10 p.m. and I want to, so then I'm going to take the melatonin, say at 7 p.m. or, 8 p.m. And then I'm going to be like shuttled then I'm going to start having sex. And then boom, at 10 p.m. is where I might have my orgasm. Then all of your systems will be basically synced up.
Wow.
And that will
because then after the orgasm, if it's 10 p.m., then you're coming down and going into the deeper sleep.
And you'll go deep into restore.
Yeah. And so you don't want to have a big cardio, like sexual workout right before bed, also.
You can. So the thing about what makes sex like an interesting type of exercise, because it's exercise. What makes it an interesting type of exercise is that it is more intense than most other exercises, right? Your heart is racing, your breath is super fast, all of your muscles get super tense, more so than in most any other exercises, up to a point of complete engagement, and then a sudden release that is a very quick ushering you into a down state. So it's different. I mean, you can sometimes probably get that with exercise, but it's pretty hard to push yourself to that extent.
To that, like it's almost like a hyper focus, and then especially with orgasm, there's such a wash and a oneness. I've heard these stories. I've never seen it on the functional MRI machines where like the whole brain is a wash with this cascade of neurochemistry at point of orgasm. But then it sounds like
sudden silence, and that's the silence that you can catch that wave and then just go straight into deep sleep.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd be horrible at that, I have to admit, because for me, the most precious and sacred time is after orgasm. That afterglow time is so bonding and so intimate. And I can't stand it if someone falls asleep on me. It's like, no, how is that for you? Let's talk about it. Let's vision, like do some magic.
And then that's the beauty of individual need, right? Is that doesn't work for you. Like for me, who actually I'm a very light sleeper. And so it's actually hard for me to get to sleep. It's hard for me to stay asleep. And so this is one of the key ways for me to get into this deeply relaxed state, and I'm gone. And so it's very helpful for me.
So we'd be like dastardly lover, like we'd be incompatible.
Like, shut up.
Yeah, I'd be like talking. So, but what I am deeply compatible with is this notion of know yourself and be true to that even though you're studying all these rhythms, there's a way that you look at, well, what works for the individual, because we do have these massive individual differences.
And if you think about, I've been thinking about sex in terms of these rhythms, and what is resonance but an orgasm, right? You have two different rhythms between people, right? You've got two people who have their own rhythm, and there's an internal rhythm in one person and another rhythm, and the idea that we have these natural frequencies, right? And a person can, like the metaphor or the example of resonance is a child on a swing. The swing has a natural frequency, right, that goes like this. And then when the child is on it and the parent pushes the child, that's somebody getting synced up to the swing's natural frequency, and then it gets larger, right? So what is part of the goal of sex, right, is to sync up find someone's natural frequency, right? Like make each other's frequency shared.
Yeah.
And that's really where then suddenly you get this really resonant energy and the orgasm comes.
It's such a beautiful, it's more than a metaphor. You're pointing to something in the depth structures of reality, like everything's frequencies. And so when we do come together in lovemaking, we're coming together and I talk about it a lot like a medicine exchange, but really what it is there's this tuning into each other's frequencies and thereby amplifying. Part of that like ecstatic feeling is to become one, and that we dissolve our separate rhythms and we're like now in this oneness state. It's really really beautiful to see, to have that felt somatically, and then to hear it being confirmed scientifically.
Yeah, and I think that another, can I switch the conversation slightly? Okay, so one of the things I think is that I bring up a lot in the book is this idea that we are, there's a theory called the generalized unsafety theory of stress, GUTS is the acronym, and it's by a guy named Julian Thayer, and he's just absolutely brilliant. And his thought is, he's taken a totally different tack on stress and saying stress isn't out there. We are born stressed. And we are born in this sympathetic revved up overstate, like, overdrive, and that, babies are born screaming, right? They're born unsafe and they're born in a threatened state.
Wow.
And that as we age through parents that take care of us, that we can start to learn how to self-soothe, that we can learn that we have community, that we can learn that we have love, right? That love is the connection between developing the restorative parasympathetic drive that can calm down that stress response. And that's, I think, where this all of this stuff connects, right? That there's sex by itself as like an exercise, but then there's also sex as that afterglow of connection, right? Of the oneness that comes from, there's kind of an exercise aspect of it, and there's an athletic aspect of it. And then suddenly there's that aftermath in the downstate where suddenly we have deep connection to another person. And that's love.
It's really touching, because there is that it's pointing us in the direction of like the potential of what lovemaking can do, which is it can deeply be healing and nourishing. And then you point out the contrast in your book. You talk about how the wrong kind of touch or sex with the wrong lover can just rub you the wrong way and actually irritate you and be the opposite, of healing and nurturing. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so I think that I think probably everybody has been touched in the wrong way, right? In that way that you realize that you're not safe, and that there's an intention there that isn't about love, and that we've actually kind of, maybe stumbled into sexual situations that have, going after hoping to find love, and then it turns out that wasn't love, and it can go into the opposite direction where suddenly it creates this state of stress that triggers, maybe a past experience of stress, and it can actually just create chronic stress and anxiety and panic. So a lot of the, really trying to figure out what is the right, God, right seems kind of weird there, but what is the
resonance?
Yeah. Who is the partner, who is the situation, or, with yourself, even like discovering, like, what is the rhythm? What is my own rhythm? And then what is the situation where I'm feeling safe and feeling like I can open up and feeling like I can actually reach a really great orgasm and feeling like then we can connect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is medicine, but if it's in the wrong quantity or from the wrong person, it can also be like poison. It's and we even talked about like there and sometimes even addictive poison, where it's like it's something you're seeking and then it's empty, and you're seeking and it's not actually filling. And yeah, so it's beautiful, because I think it points to self-knowledge again, like knowing yourself, knowing what nurtures you, knowing what you're seeking, and not making it someone else's responsibility of, here's what you need to do in order to, but in order to give me an orgasm or put me in the perfect downstate. And I actually pause as I say this, and I realize, are you concerned about people almost misusing that advice or that information of like, oh, okay, let me use sex to biohack or to get into a certain state, or to, using sex instead of it being like, for the right reasons of.
Yeah, I really feel like I'm anti-biohacking. I sort of have this feeling of this idea that you're trying to trick nature into somehow using it as some, you can somehow outsmart billions of years of us figuring out what these rhythms are. These rhythms are really strong. So, and they've been around forever, and every animal and plant and bacteria abide by them. So there isn't really a need to biohack. It's more that you're following universal rhythms, right? That you're kind of getting your own personal rhythm attuned to these larger rhythms that are there, and they are much larger than an individual. So do I worry that people are going to be using sex? No, I actually think that people don't have enough sex, right? I think that, like, in general, there's a lot of people who live in a bed with somebody and they just don't have intimacy, right? That they're too tired. They let the upstate and the exhaustion from the upstate push away intimacy. So yeah,
it's really tragic, the sexless marriages and the ways in which that has been deprioritized. But I do appreciate, like, in the downstate, as I understand it, you're advocating that, hey, even if you're in a sexless marriage, you can still support each other, even if sex isn't, the outlet. There's still a whole intimacy component, and there's ways to support each other, down regulating and finding those rhythms without it going to sex, or even just platonic friends.
Holding hands, hugs, phone calls, really great conversations. All of those things create the same feedback that you have community and that you're loved and that you're safe. And that's, the pack animal needs to have that, especially during the pandemic. There was this really strong skin hunger that people were feeling, just to need that physical touch from other people, which was, it's a basic need. I think the downstate is a basic need.
Yeah. I just recovered from a round of COVID myself and was very touch hungry. Just a short amount of time. It's like there's a sense of dire, like babies. Like I don't know if I can survive without being, touched in that way.
Right.
Yeah. Well, beautiful. I'm curious. In conclusion, like as we're wrapping up, if there's a message you want our audience, to really leave as an aftertaste, like, is there something above all that you want them to take away?
I think that there's a lot of solace, and there's a lot of strength and a lot of energy that we can pull from getting in touch with these natural rhythms, even when the rest of the world feels out of control and scary. And that I was just driving home, and I was thinking about, like, what is going on? Like, what is the meaning of all this? And I looked at these trees, and I realized these trees don't need to answer these questions. These trees life cycle, they abide by these natural rules. Like, they don't need to find meaning. They just are meaning, right? That they are life. And I think that, when you tap into these universal principles and you just kind of stay and you resonate with nature, and your own nature and your own biology, I do think that there's a solace there, that there's a strength that we draw from there, and that almost that idea of do less. Don't push it, just kind of get into the rhythm of it. I guess that's the idea I could leave people with.
Yeah, it's beautiful. An invitation to be human beings, not human doings, and to tune into our nature, deep nature. I love it, Sara. Thank you.
Thank you so much, KamalaDevi.
Yeah, it's so such a pleasure. Where can people find your book?
Amazon, Bookshop, all the places. Any bookstore. Go to indie bookstores. It's really hard to get books into bookstores, so indie bookstores, ask for the book. They're probably, hopefully, at Barnes and Nobles, but just support the indie booksellers.
Excellent. Thank you, and blessings.
Thank you so much, KamalaDevi.
Okay.